Cityforum is pleased to be hosting this podcast as a scene setter for the space, security and prosperity discussions it is holding this spring and summer as part of the work it has been doing over the last 4 years on intelligent defence and smart power, in a project which has had support from senior military officers and particular assistance from BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. This year, for our space work, we also have the benefit of the guidance of the Royal Aeronautical Society, whose CEO, Air Chief Marshal Sir Brian Burridge, an old friend of Cityforum, will be conducting this particular conversation on our behalf. The theme for the discussion today is the role space will play in delivering the global Britain concept, and Cityforum is delighted to welcome Samantha Job, Claire Barcham and Nick Easton as contributors to the discussion with Brian. We shall be looking at the security, economic and political opportunities that space offers to the UK, while thinking a bit about the difficulties and hazards facing the UK as it seeks to develop its ambitions as a space power. Brian, thank you for looking after us in this podcast. We look forward to the discussion that you guide.
Welcome to this Cityforum Space webinar. Now, it's been an exciting few weeks in space. On the 19th of April, we heard that NASA had successfully flown its Ingenuity drone on Mars, the first powered, controlled flight by an aircraft on another world. And NASA have been so impressed with the results, so they've actually, with the test flights, they've actually extended the rotorcraft's mission on the Red Planet. More recently, SpaceX have hit the headlines once again by launching 4 more astronauts to the International Space Station in Crew Dragon Endeavour, the first time a capsule has been reused for a mission. And the past weekend also saw NASA's first nighttime splashdown landing in 53 years, when 4 astronauts travelling in SpaceX's Crew Dragon Resilience splash landed it off the coast of Panama City. But there is a downside. Whilst more defence satellites might be welcome, certainly as far as the UK's integrated review is concerned, space is becoming very crowded. Earlier in April, a SpaceX and a OneWeb satellite came perilously close to colliding, missing each other by as little as 50 metres. Apart from their potential destruction, the collateral damage from the subsequent debris would have been enormous. And the subject today is about how space can contribute to realising the global Britain concept. And that's a statement, not a question. And here to lead us along that path, we're fortunate to have 3 experts. From the Foreign Office, Samantha Job, Director Defence and International Security. From the UK Space Agency, Claire Barcham, the Strategy Director. And from industry, Nick Easton, the Engineering Director from BAE Systems Defence and Space Division, who specialises in applied intelligence. So best we have a look and potentially try to isolate this concept of global Britain. It was, of course, a term that saw the light of day in the Brexit debate, both pre and post the 2016 referendum. But it got its policy underpinning in the Chancellor's Spending Round 2020 statement. And in that, he claimed that Spending Round 2020 matches the ambition of a global Britain. So what are the characteristics of this ambition? Well, a new chapter in our history, open to the world and free to tread our own path, blessed with a global network of friends and partners, opportunities to forge new and deeper partnerships, freedom to do things differently, and of most interest to us, keeping the UK's place at the leading edge of science and technology. And that's seen as essential to our prosperity and competitiveness in the digital age. So our aim is to have secured our status as a science and tech superpower by 2030. Now, these aren't my definitions. These are the Prime Minister's. This is what he wrote in the introduction to the integrated review. And high amongst these ambitions is space capability, which gets a fair bit of treatment in the review. But space, like much else in the economic ecosystem, is sensitive to systemic competition. And as pointed out in the review, space will be a domain of increasing opportunity as the application of new technologies and space enables new possibilities, from commercial opportunities to international development and climate action. But increasing commercial and military use of space will make it an important sphere of competition. There'll be considerable risk to strategic stability if this is not managed and regulated effectively. We therefore await with interest the publication of the UK's space strategy. And last time we had a space strategy was back in 2010, which set a target of achieving 10% of the global space market, which then was estimated to have been potentially £400 billion by 2030. And there have been updates along the way which have been plausibly optimistic, I'd say. So now let's look at 2021 and the integrated review presenting itself as a reset. So how can space contribute to realising the Global Britain concept? To start, Samantha, could you comment on the importance of British capability in space for the maintenance of our security and also the development of our prosperity?
Thank you very much, Brian. To state the obvious, space as a domain is something which goes well beyond any individual nation state. It is an international policy by definition and by science. So I'm the director in the Foreign Office responsible for that part of policy. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what does international policy mean in this area. And the first thing we try to do is to promote international understanding of what you have just described, both the opportunities and the challenges. And there are opportunities on the prosperity and economic side. There are opportunities for our fantastic technological capability, our industry, which you'll hear more about from others. But there are also international opportunities to be part of an international community around space that wants to see space develop in a coherent way which promotes security and prosperity for all and not the opposite. And as you've also said, there are challenges on the other side, as modern society is increasingly reliant on space infrastructure, but it also becomes more competitive, both in the private sector and internationally, and with state actors becoming more capable and, as you alluded to, the sort of strategic risk that throws from that. Just to start then on opportunities, we are the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and because sometimes overlooked in the space debate is how data can support the development agenda. So data which we get from space supports the Sustainable Development Goals. It can support monitoring changes to climate, but also monitoring progress of activities to tackle climate change. It can help with agriculture, it can help with education. There are all sorts of ways in which this can be a force for good type of agenda. Secondly, on the challenges side of this, there are a few different strands that I would pick out. First is, even in the most civilian end of the challenges, is the debris situation, which you just described. Every launch creates some debris if it's a multiple launch. And we have to think through, with partners and with the private sector, who is responsible for that and how do we manage that as a problem. As you may know, the UK is a pretty good place for this. We have the University of Surrey Removed Debris Satellite. That's the sort of technology that we want to expand on. And secondly, in the long-term sustainable use of space as one of the global commons, as we call it, we have supported through the UN. We've used our diplomatic power in negotiating to support the 21 guidelines for the long-term sustainability of outer space, which were negotiated through the UN. And with the Space Agency, we're helping the UN promote that. So that's awareness raising through the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. They have a project which is about promoting space sustainability, and it includes technical capability building for states around the world to understand this problem and to be able to do something about it. So that international flavour of bringing countries together to promote peaceful uses of space is one strand. And one strand of this for the future is going to be how we do that between government and the private sector. What I would say, I'll say it now, but we'll say it a lot probably in the conversation, is how closely we work with other parts of government to bring together one coherent agenda so that we might be the sort of negotiating face, but it sits on all the expertise, both from the Space Agency, Ministry of Defence, from BEIS, from other parts of government. But there's also the challenge end of this is the sort of threat picture. If you look at the space ecosystem, everything from what is on the ground to what is in space and the communication between the two, these are systems which other countries might have the capacity to damage. So they might damage satellites, they might interfere with satellites, they might send lasers up from the ground, or they might do proximity types of activities. We're driving a process through the UN to create awareness of that as a situation, so people know how reliant they are on these space infrastructures, but also to have a conversation about what are the best behaviours that we want to promote between states for managing some of those risks. And that is around understanding the sorts of behaviours where you might want, if it were your satellite, to know what other countries are doing with their satellites. So information in advance of any kind of proximity, information to reassure and to explain activity so that you don't get, and this is the real risk, a threat perception from other people's activities in space that could lead to, as you say, that strategic stability risk. If you see someone trying to take out your space infrastructure, what are you going to conclude from that, and what might you do about it, is something we're trying to head off. And then the last strand that I wanted to make sure I'd set out is how closely we do work with other countries. So my team works very closely with the US, as you might expect, on the security and defence side of this, but we also work very closely across NATO. That UN group that I just talked about, there's a core group of key countries who come together to work through the UN processes on this agenda. And I'm struck by how many of my dialogues with other countries around the world, space is now on the agenda. So I lead a group across the G7, for instance, which has non-proliferation in the title, but space is on that agenda. It's on my bilateral agenda with India, with China. There's an increased appetite to talk about this around the world. And of course, with the European Space Agency being a pretty critical part of how we've developed our space agenda up to now. So we're trying to promote international understanding, both of those opportunities and of those risks. And we're trying to build international relationships that help us take forward the agenda we want, both for the UK and to see this as an ecosystem which is to the advantage of everyone globally. I'll stop there, if I may. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Very comprehensive. There's just one area that I'd just like to get something on the table right at the start, and that's the matter of regulation as distinct from cooperative bodies on sustainability, etc. And these new domains, new technologies are causing us problems, as we see only today over Facebook, etc. But what is, very briefly, what is the state of the art on regulation in space?
So you will discover that there is a term used in the integrated review of regulatory diplomacy, which is relatively new to diplomacy, but it is something which speaks exactly to what you're talking about. How do we use our international negotiating capabilities to deliver a regulatory framework internationally that works for everyone, including us? Now, there are two strands to that. One, if you want it to be truly binding on everyone, you have to bring everyone with you. And two is you have to make it work for the sort of open space infrastructure and ecosystem that we want to see, and not the sort of very, very closed down sort of rules that others in the international community might prefer to see. So it is very much an active part of our agenda.
Okay, thank you. And just moving into that ecosystem now then, Claire, from the perspective of the UK Space Agency, and you've got Locus right over the end-to-end of that ecosystem in many ways, what are the particular areas where UK might have special impact, whether it's through the experience we've gathered so far, and particularly from that acceleration in 2010, the skills that have been developed and the capabilities in terms of technology?
Well, I'm going to demonstrate, I think, Samantha's point about just how closely the Space Agency works with our Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office colleagues by touching on quite a few similar themes, I think. What's really interesting in this question about how space can contribute to realising the Global Britain concept is that we already do. The UK space sector is already making a really important contribution to the UK's position globally. We already use space capabilities to protect the UK, our allies, and the global community. The Skynet satellites, for example, provide secure communications. support to both UK and allied defence and security. The UK has been a member of the International Disaster Charter since, I think, back in 2005. So since then, we've made UK satellite imagery available to support relief efforts following extreme weather or other conflict or disasters around the world. The space sector already contributes to building the UK's global reputation, projecting our soft power and attracting trade and investment through the way in which we've provided leadership in global science and innovation endeavours. We've taken lead roles in European Space Agency space exploration missions to monitor the sun. We have a spacecraft already on the way to the sun in solar orbiter. Mercury, through the Bepi-Colombo missions, to return samples from Mars. All of that is drawing on our existing strength in the development of scientific instruments, the development of rovers, the sort of technology that are critical to global missions to explore and discover more about our solar system. Our industry is responsible for a number of world firsts, particularly commercial firsts. The world's first commercial satellite capable of taking colour videos of the Earth from space. All of this is about building the UK's prestige, power and reputation as a science and technology superpower. And whilst that language of being a science superpower is relatively new, the space sector has been doing it, as you have said, since 2010 or indeed earlier. We already use space capabilities to support global development. We have a £150 million international partnerships programme, which uses space technology to address issues from food security to biodiversity, criminality, land management. We've supported projects which help monitor peatland in Southeast Asia or forest health in South America, particularly drawing on our sector's strength in Earth observation, using satellites to capture high-resolution images of the Earth. And as we pioneer new technology and build new in-orbit infrastructure, we do have some real opportunities to position ourselves at the forefront of further international efforts to address the decade's greatest global challenges. Climate change, as Samantha mentioned, over half of all climate variables are best monitored from space. The UK already has leading capability here. We're leading the Truths mission. It's a European Space Agency mission which would create a climate lab in space that calibrates satellites' Earth observation data to ensure their quality, really drawing on our strength in climate science and technology. Connectivity, another huge global challenge. Crikey, just imagine how much more difficult lockdown would have been if we couldn't rely on connectivity. Much of that is enabled by satellites. So as demand for instantaneous high-speed comms and broadband at home and on the move becomes increasingly normalised, UK low Earth orbit satellites offer services that can fill gaps that terrestrial systems simply can't reach. For example, just look at what the UK's OneWeb satellites are aiming to do in offering reliable internet access to remote areas around the world. What a great capability to offer to other nations. And space debris, I'd really echo the points that Samantha has made about the importance of us as a global community coming together to tackle this challenge of space debris. Thinking about the technology that might require, it does speak to a number of areas of existing UK space sector strength. There are nearly 1 million pieces of debris over 1 centimetre already in orbit. And yes, we do need to make sure that we're setting the norms diplomatically and regulatorily that help us to better manage this risk in the future. But we need to back it up with technical innovations as well. There's a British company called Astroscale that's recently launched a mission that is testing technology using magnets to retrieve debris. The UK Space Agency is investing in the sort of technology that will help us to hopefully identify and recover debris already in orbit, as well as preventing the accumulation of future debris. We can also create opportunities for the UK to gain strategic advantage in highly competitive international markets. That's a really important shift in policy coming through the integrated review, this idea that science and technology, it's not just the way that we solve global challenges, but for the UK, it's a part of our competitive endeavour. It's how we try to gain advantage for ourselves, our industry, our academic community within an increasingly dynamic and competitive global community. If you look at the sort of technology that would enable us to tackle space debris, for example, robotic technology, we can use that also to compete in commercial markets that might in future provide entirely new commercial services. So, for example, the idea that you could build and repair spacecraft in orbit rather than on the ground could be hugely lucrative for companies in the UK and draws on the same sort of technical capability that also enables us to tackle some of these global challenges around debris removal. So a really exciting opportunity for us to build on that strength that we've developed over the past decade and apply it to future challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. That's surprising in a way, but and we'll come on to the complexities of a nation like the UK adopting a space strategy, which is actually going to fly, if you'll forgive the pun. But can you just give us a feel for the situation now in terms of how joined up is the ecosystem? We know that a number of government departments are involved. We know that the network will have to already include universities and SMEs potentially, but just give us a feel briefly on, how joined up is it at the moment?
The big step forward is the National Space Council. For the first time, a Prime Minister chaired cabinet committee that brings together the most senior ministers as representatives of departments, all with an interest in space. We've always seen that space has attracted interest from a number of different departments, both on the civil side and on the military side, but lacked the ability to convene decision-making power and resource across government. The civil service is notoriously difficult to join up at times, so giving us a platform to make shared decisions that recognise the way in which space can speak to multiple different departments' interests, help each of them to achieve their policy goals, whether it's for the environment, for public health, for local planning, or alternatively, whether it's for the sorts of relationships that we want to create internationally, the sort of reputation that we want to build for ourselves, or if we want to use a different part of the toolkit that government has. Sometimes the best way in order to achieve change or success might be to use regulation held by one department or investment held by another department. The ability to join up that thinking and that decision-making across government is relatively new since last year and has been a really important stride forward as we then look to create consensus around this new strategy and take it forward through shared delivery.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of very important points there, not least investment, which we'll come back to. But what is clear from what both of you have said so far is that this global Britain concept is indeed about prosperity rather than national vanity, which in scientific endeavours of the past, the latter has been more of a driver. But Nick, you're as an industrialist, how do you see the opportunities in the UK space sector? I mean, is this going to be dominated by the primes with deep pockets, or do you see it being a collaborative venture alongside SMEs, universities, through which you stimulate innovation? And, maybe Team Tempest is a good example, the next generation advanced fighter aircraft, and which has taken just that approach. So, how is that all going to look, and how are you going to bind the government into this?
So I guess from an industrial defence perspective, and it's worth pointing out that defence and security primes are different to other primes, but we probably share many of the same issues. From my perspective, the space domain has always been of interest to the defence and security world. However, in the past, the cost of conventional access have made it a more limited arena for the UK than perhaps we would have liked. And as I think Samantha said, we rely quite heavily on our allies, and some of those relationships are maybe not as symmetric as we would like them to be. I think it's also the case that in recent years, the conventional big space type activity, particularly in the defence world, has become, or at least perceived to be, or increasingly vulnerable to some of the actions of our potential adversaries. So there is a kind of moment of change, I think. And we see the developments of lower cost and simpler technology as opening up the world of low Earth orbit, for example, as has already been mentioned, to many more users. And I'm absolutely convinced that will include opening up the space domain in a much broader sense to the military and other similar markets. I think there will be initially at least a particular emphasis on providing support to communications, particularly beyond line of sight communications, and also some of the surveillance activities that probably match some of the other applications that have already been mentioned, but with a degree of flexibility, I think, that hasn't been available before, and also a degree of timeliness, which is new for us. The time between having an idea and actually seeing it implemented in orbit is going to be hugely reduced. I think that certainly in the defence world, we're really talking about what you might call a sovereign capability, or maybe that language is confusing and assured capability is perhaps more relevant. And it's therefore important that government does take a role and supports these activities. And there are levels of investment not only available to us, but to the community as a whole that match the scale of the potential markets and applications that we're trying to address. I think the defence market or the defence application is slightly different to some of the other kind of consumer orientated applications, in that we do need a degree of resilience and robustness that other commercial providers don't need. And so we need to think about the kind of integration and so forth and technology slightly in a slightly different way to others. But there's a fundamental kind of technology base that I think we all kind of share. I think a couple of other things that it's worth sort of picking out, in that a lot of this, that the applications that drop out of this access to LEO, certainly in the defence and security markets, will induce organisational change, if you like, in inverted commas. We're going to have to do things differently in order to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented. And an example might be that the data produced from a space system in LEO can be regarded as potentially tactical. So someone on the captain of the ship might have direct access to intelligence rather than the more strategic way that we do things at the moment. I guess in terms of what we need and how we will act, I think it is clear that as a defence prime, we want to be part of a growing and vibrant UK space industry. We want to be able to work with the providers of the new technology, perhaps SMEs in particular, that allows us access to that technology without stifling the agility and innovation. And sometimes in the past, we haven't had a brilliant track record in there. I think we're getting better, and we need to be very conscious about it. I think we need, in particular, to think about the skill sets that we need. I think if I was to put up a barrier or propose a barrier to what we want to achieve, it's having, in my world, the engineering skill sets that we need, but I recognise there are other skill sets as well. And maybe we can use space, the kind of iconic space thing, if you like, as an opportunity to bring new talent into the engineering profession and others, particularly though from groups who may not otherwise have found engineering to be an attractive option. But we will need to find ways of creating and managing this pipeline of skilled talent and generating the skill sets. In a sense, we can open the door and encourage people to come through the door, but we do that then need mechanisms to train and skill appropriately and quickly. We can't hang around. I think if we're going to go for this, we need to go with it at pace. And that's the major barrier, I think, to seeing the promise of these technology developments.
And just on that matter of agility and pace, what do you think the environment is like in the big companies and the primes for PV investment in space, having seen these traffic lights change, if you like, in terms of the UK's aspirations?
So I can only kind of talk for ourselves, but I'm sure it's very similar in the other primes. But we recognise that if you like, the change in tide, we recognise the need to move very quickly. We recognise that we can't do it all ourselves. We have to do it in partnership, both with government and also within the wider ecosystem, that we need to jointly nurture and cherish, I think.
Okay, right. Well, in the spirit of agility and pace, we'll pick up speed now into escape velocity. And what I'd like to do is there is in the community, the space community that I move in, there is one holy grail, and that's the UK space strategy, backed up by programs, backed up by the scheduling, backed up by the finance, backed up by the procurement capability, because essentially that is all very indistinct at the moment. Now, Claire, you provided considerable comment in the journey up to the integrated review on what you thought we needed to see. So start us off. What do you want to see in a space strategy?
Well, I wouldn't wish to preempt the strategy, which should shortly be published. We're really excited about the progress that has been made to develop our space strategy and looking forward to its publication in the not too distant future. It feels to me that the main thing that our strategy should do is bring together the vast toolkit that we have across government and apply it to shared goals. It's what you would want from any cross-government strategy, but particularly relevant to space, where, as I mentioned, there are so many interests in different departments and tools available to different departments that previously we have simply never joined up. If you look at space debris as a really good example, it can't be solved by one department acting alone. We need to make sure that our diplomatic colleagues are working at the UN and with other nations to set the rules of the road that mean that we can be more responsible in future. But we need to back that up by ourselves regulating domestically to demonstrate that we are a responsible participant in the global space community. That's led by the Department for Transport and the UK Space Agency. We need to invest in the sort of technology that shows that we also are looking at ways in which to reduce our own impact. For example, looking at how we support technologies that can enable future reusable launch vehicles or greener propulsion.
Do you see the agency becoming a procurement agency, for example? A thin, almost a thin prime across the rest of the ecosystem?
Well, the UK Space Agency already sponsors the development of technology projects. You just need to look at the Space-Based Position Navigation and Timing project to show that we are actively steering and directing the development of technology that could support government's needs as an end user. And there is certainly a need for the strategy to highlight the areas where we need to develop strategic capability in the UK to meet government's requirements, potentially as an end customer.
Samantha, so what would give you the real convening power around the G7 table if you were to slap down a document and say, there's the UK's space strategy? What would it need to do for you?
Well, you'll be pleased to know it's not a million miles from what it needs to do for Claire, because this does need to be a genuinely cross-government piece of work. So the first thing I would want is coherence across the opportunities and challenges, across the civil and defence, across the prosperity and security. That all needs to add up to a coherent message, if you like. So the second thing I would look for is clarity, so that if I'm going out to talk about the UK's role in space, I've got a clear narrative about how the UK sees itself and its sector and its role internationally. That's a message we can take out. And some of that clarity is around what we are doing and what we're not. Government doesn't need to do everything, and we are one of many players internationally. Maybe we don't want to do everything. And then the third thing I would want is to have that international aspect baked in all the way through. In my policy team on space, they have a running joke that space policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. In other words, all of the other countries thinking about space have space policies too. And we need to be thinking through what the consequences are, both for those we want to work with and those we want to be aware of who may have a different agenda. So all the different aspects of space policy have an international angle to them. And we want to be able to understand those, play in those, and have confidence when we go out into the world with that agenda.
Yeah, we'll touch on this in a moment again in the sense of so who's the competition out there and what does the strategy have to do to beat the competition? But Nick, from your point of view, what would you want to see? I mean, we've just had a reasonably good defence and security industrial strategy, and probably the best one since Paul Drayson's 2005. So is that what you're looking for?
What the most important thing to us, I think, is stability and coherence. When we set out a strategy, that's great. We all sign up to it. We need to follow it and not chop and change. That's really key. And I think it needs to be, for us anyway, it needs to be underpinned with a number of building blocks. I think, as I've already said, the most important thing is a strategy around skills and education. And then there's whole stuff around research funding, technology development, support to SMEs and thing. I'd also like to echo the international partnering. That's very important to us. We really need to know who we need to go and partner with. That is in part our decision in terms of engineering, business, but it also needs to fit into the international policy framework as well. So in brief, those are the things I think that we would like to see, but stability overall is the most important.
Thanks. And this business of competition is important because it works on two dimensions. Obviously, one is it provides the wherewithal to penetrate markets, but it also builds up those markets. And I know, Claire, the agency has pointed out of late that the export performance of the UK space ecosystem has been, I won't say declining, but it's been reducing a little. Can you say something about exports and what the competition is like in the export market?
Well, exports are currently worth over £5 billion to the UK space sector. In terms of the health and strength of the competition overseas, it depends on the market, of course. But we do know that we rely very heavily on exports to Europe and to North America, but that also we're seeing greater diversity in the export destinations for UK goods and services, certainly supported by programs like our International Partnerships Programme, that ability to make connections between the UK and nations overseas that don't have access to domestic space capabilities is certainly a great way for us to be a really good international partner and neighbour, but also it opens up trade avenues for UK companies that might previously have been more difficult for them to access.
And Samantha, for you, where do you see, from a national security point of view, where do you see the competition coming from? And then from a commercial point of view, how does that change, perhaps?
There's so many different ways I could answer that question. I think we need to be acutely aware that our technological advantage, as we've set out in the IR, is something that we also need to protect from national security threats. So there are actors out there who might like to be very interested in our cutting-edge technology and acquire it for their own use in various nefarious ways. We're going to need to be quite active about how we think about that and how we protect our intellectual property and our ingenuity and our innovation and our SMEs. The other thing I would say is there's always going to be competition in international markets between us and some of our best friends. We still sometimes find ourselves competing for contracts with other governments internationally. That's part of how things work internationally. But it's also true that increasingly, right across defence capability and into space sector capability, that the pattern of developing things jointly with other countries and then exporting them jointly is an emerging and I think will be a continuing part of that international picture. So there is some competition, but I think there's also increasing collaboration as we move forward. And as we know where the UK niche expertise and value add is, then we've got something to bring to those capability development conversations should we choose to do that in partnership with others.
Yeah, I just want to touch related to that on assured capability, which Nick mentioned, because the Defence Command paper leaves us with a rather less than optimum ISR capability, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capability, and then gives us the reassurance that we will develop and launch a constellation of ISR satellites, which will be very necessary to fill that gap. But to what extent will we need to regard that sort of thing as assured capability with onshore intellectual property, onshore launch, etc.? What do you think, Samantha?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's something that government is going to be grappling with for a while. As we look at this sector, which are the things where we need to have that assured or possibly even sovereign capability? Which are the areas where we're going to collaborate with partners and specifically allies who have a similar way of looking at the world? And where do we actually not maybe need that same level, and a commercial route to the solution is perfectly acceptable within those boundaries of what we need at the national security end, and what we maybe only need to promote a commercial capability that doesn't need to have that level of assurance. I don't mean to say only in the sense of it's less important, but it might be the security element of it, the assured element of it, may be less critical to success.
Yeah. Nick, you and I, from an industrial background, crave stability of intent, because that's the way we get the attention of our investors. And there's no better element of that than a government saying, yeah, this is assured capability and we mean it. What's your take on that? How do you see it?
So I think it's in my little introduction, I talked about sovereign and assured and deliberately changed my words because actually it's quite difficult to pin even assured down to precisely what it means. And I think there's lots of different levels. So do you need to produce all the semiconductor components that go on your platform? Probably not. Do you need to launch it from the UK? Not necessarily. Do you need to build it in the UK? Probably. Do you need to have control over the TT&C system? Absolutely. So you have to go through, I think, all the various elements and decide how much you're prepared to spend in order to reach a degree of assurance that you're content with. And again, I think in part it comes down to the international partnering. There are certain nations who would be much more comfortable in having joint assurance with than others, I guess. So I think it's a topic that we need to sit and think very, very carefully about exactly what we mean and how much extra we're prepared to pay for that.
Okay, thanks. I just want to go on to the time as always goes against us, but I just want to touch on skills and then I'll ask you for some closing comments, each of you. But Claire, you what would I say, pressurised, probably too strong, but you were promoting to government the significance of understanding the skills we need and how to generate them. Would you like to say a bit about that?
The UK Space Agency has recently led a space sector skills survey, which is a really important part of helping us to better understand where those skill pressures or gaps might be, and then ensure that there is a close connection between those that are designing training and education programs and the end employers who are crying out for those skills. I think some of the most interesting findings there, that it's not just about STEM skills, it's not just about science, technology, engineering and maths, actually companies are saying to us they really need individuals that both have softer skills, business awareness, business development, commercial awareness, but also the marriage of the two, those scientific or technical specialisms alongside the softer skills. And that's where we really need to make sure that we're trying to focus and tailor training and education provision.
Thanks. And Samantha, today's the day, of course, that we've got the visa relaxation scheme cutting in. Do you see in your international discussions that nations regard the UK as the place or one of the places where they want to send their brightest and best, either to do research in our universities or work in BA systems or whatever?
Yes, we do. And we increasingly get conversations with one of the things that the UK can bring to the table in space. When I talk about the space ecosystem, I don't only mean the information of the space technology itself, but the ecosystem around it. If you look at the UK, the role of the city in insurance and in finance, the role of our academic institutions in the research and in the business skills that Claire's talked about, the UK has all of it to offer in one ecosystem. And if that's something that we can talk about confidently overseas. We do see continuing interest in the UK education sector from the sorts of students who want to develop in these skills areas. And that's something I would expect to continue even into this more challenging time for international travel. It's frequently students who want to get straight back on the plane and come back.
Yeah, for sure. And Nick, how is it so far? We always say that we can generate interest in primary school kids in STEM subjects by talking about space or dinosaurs, and there's nothing in between. But now space is big, and we are already seeing a huge upsurge in interest in that younger age group. But how is your pipeline? Are you getting apprentices that you need? Are you getting the graduates you need?
I would say at the moment we're skills limited, and the answer is no. It's I think a huge almost opportunity to increase the diversity of the folk coming in through the door, and I don't think we can do it on our own. We have to reach way down the kind of STEM ladder, if you like, in order to influence people's choices. I think, we've done the pitching up at universities and giving lots of exciting talks and so forth, but it's in most cases it's too late by then. People are making choices, as you say, at primary schools and shortly after. And I think space, as you say, is one of those topics that actually attracts young people into these careers, and we need to build on that. We need to develop a kind of skills accelerator in order to take our graduates and develop the key skills that we need to underpin the kind of space endeavour, if you like. So there's huge opportunities and huge challenges, I think, almost in equal parts.
Okay, well, some closing comments. It can be a reprise of something you've already put on the table or something new, but let's start with you, Claire.
Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity. What an interesting and engaging conversation. For me, the Future National Space Strategy is a huge opportunity to set a vision for how we should use space to meet government's top priorities. We focus today on achieving this vision for global Britain, but I would add into that mix also our climate commitments. Achieving net zero is of critical importance to this government, as is levelling up our economy across our union, and space can offer solutions across each of those areas. In doing so, our strategy needs to recognise and build on our existing capability, future opportunities, but also what other nations are doing. Just as we are having these conversations about how important space should be to our nation over the next decades, so are other countries, and we need to make sure that we're recognising our position within this global community and bring to bear the full range of government's tools to achieve the best for our sector and its interests, whether that's regulation or investment, education or guidance, and challenge ourselves to think differently about how we support the sector. It's a really fantastic opportunity, and it feels like a wonderful time to be a part of the UK space sector.
Okay, thank you. And Samantha?
So the first thing I need to report is that I have a primary-age daughter who has been determined to go to space since she was 4. And now is very specific. She wants to be an engineer and go to space and do her engineering in space. So I'll carry on doing what I can do to make sure that doesn't dilute over time. But secondly, I did want to register 2 things. One is that it's fantastic that this effort is cross-government. It's taken us a little bit of time to get there, but it does feel very different from where it was a few years ago. And I think that's very much to our advantage. And secondly, the international conversation is changing. So it's great that we have a clear vision of what we want that international conversation to be. And part of it, if I'm very honest, is still about encouraging education of both the British population, but internationally, for people to understand what the space sector is, how dependent they are on it, what opportunities it presents, but also the risks and challenges that we need to measure so that we don't wake up one day and think we wish we had done something differently about the regulations or about our international work on what's acceptable behaviour. So I'll give you a commitment that me and my team, backed up by the rest of government, will be out there trying to set that framework internationally that helps grow this sector as quickly as we can and have the right kind of space activity that we want, both for our national security and for our prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. We are reassured. Nick, final word from you.
Really just echoing what the others have already said. I think it's a really exciting time and we are kind of running at it. In order to make that successful, we do need that stability and coherence of purpose, and it's good that we're in that position at the moment. We have this broad ecosystem that we do need to invest in, to nurture and cherish, if you like. And I think finally there is this international element that where we wish to partner, it needs to be within a wider international policy. And the fact that space policy doesn't operate in a vacuum is the best thing I've heard for months. So if I may, I'll use it.
Yes, you feel free. You heard it here first. Yes,
indeed.
Well, thank you, all 3 of you. A very stimulating and interesting discussion. And there are undoubtedly some themes developing which are different, I have to say. I mean, the first is that there is a lot on which to build. There's a terrific opportunity here. And because it's now being codified, because it's getting profile in the integrated review and also in the Defence Command paper and its associated industrial strategy, then you get the sense that the planets are aligning. My second point, though, is we have to be really agile. We have to be flexible. We have to organise ourselves so that we are competitive almost at the drop of a hat, because as we've discussed, there are other nations out there ready to eat our lunch. And some of them have been taking a rather more coherent approach for rather longer. The skills problem, we really need to address now. And it was good to see the Space Academy coming on online, et cetera, but we can't wait because that pipeline is so long, and the competition both nationally and internationally for the best brains in computer science, digital sciences, the STEM subjects, and even in business is ever present. The one thing, though, that I think is probably the biggest advantage and is how space can contribute to a global Britain, is the generation of the convening power and the excitement. The convening power because we've now got the Prime Minister chairing the Space Council, and the excitement, for me, the parallel is 1947 to 1967, where in aerospace we went from Mach 1 to Mach 6.72 in 20 years. And the sector then, and I was just going to become an undergraduate then with my log tables and slide rule, but the sector then was glamorous, it was exciting, and it was at the forefront of what young people wanted to do. And now we have the chance to recreate that. And if we can do that, it will solve all the other problems. So again, thank you for your engagement this afternoon, and I wish you all every success in pursuing this vision. Thank you.